I'm a hypocrite. I claim I'm sick of remakes, yet I keep buying them. Why is that? Right now I'm mainly playing Metal Gear Solid Delta and Trails in the Sky First Chapter, a pair of remakes. My PlayStation Wrapped for 2025 had 3 redos in my top 5 most played games, those being Tomb Raider 1-3 Remastered, Grand Theft Auto 3 Definitive Edition, and Yooka-Replaylee. My wishlist of games to buy this year includes Yakuza Kiwami 3, or at least it did, more on that shortly, Tomb Raider Legacy of Atlantis, and Danganronpa 2x2. 3 more revisits. All the while, I sit here stating I would rather spend my time and money on new experiences. Where does that difference between what I say and what I do come from? Let's sit down and explore why we're getting so many re-releases, whether that's necessarily a bad thing, and what this means for the wider gaming industry. I'm going to use a few different terms for remakes in this video, so let's quickly go over some definitions before we continue. You might categorize these differently, and there are games that don't cleanly fit into one category. That's okay. If anything, it just shows how many different approaches developers are taking, and how messy this situation is. Re-release. This is the exact same game made available for a new platform. The Arcade and Console Archives collections are good examples, as are Capcom's many legacy collections. These typically use emulation, running the original ROM or ISO with as few alterations as possible. Remaster. This is the same game but running natively rather than under emulation. They feature enhancements such as a higher frame rate, running at a higher resolution, and with higher quality textures. Think the Batman Return to Arkham collection, even if that was poorly executed and many fans still prefer the originals. Remake. This is the same game, recreated with modern tools to a modern standard, but without changing the core game. My favourite examples being the Crash Bandicoot N. Sane trilogy and the Spyro Reignited trilogy. Reimagining. These games go back to the drawing board and ask what the game design document would look like if the game was made today. The results are wildly different games to their originals. Resident Evil 2, 3, and 4 fall into this category. This isn't a perfect system. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 Plus 2 calls itself a remaster on the box and backports mechanics from later games, despite my closest best fit definition being a remake. Let's not even try to define what their bizarre take on Tony Hawk's 4 would be classified as. Maybe regression is the best word for that disaster. Sadly, they're necessary definitions for confusing situations where games have multiple re-releases, even on the same platform. For example, 2 versions of Metal Gear Solid 3 are available on the PlayStation 5 through the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Remaster and the Metal Gear Solid Delta Remake. So why redo a game? There are a few benefits worth exploring alongside their downsides. The first is simple preservation. Unlike movies, music, and novels, games are uniquely tied to the hardware they were originally created for. Sure, I still have my Mega Drive and my original cartridges, but I'm the exception, not the rule. Yes, anyone watching this video probably cares enough about games and has enough technical knowledge to boot up any Sega Saturn game via an emulator. That doesn't account for or describe your average consumer, who are the overwhelming market majority. Someone who sees Sonic Origins on the shelf during their grocery shopping and thinks, "Oh yeah, I remember that game." There are also a lot of arguments as to why this isn't preservation. Only a select few games will ever get this treatment, leaving the majority of titles trapped on deprecated hardware. These new versions can be significantly different from their originals, often losing what made them special in the first place. Even when done well, it's a temporary solution, as listings get pulled when licensing deals expire, while the modern-day platforms they're re-released for today will eventually become the legacy platforms of tomorrow, putting us back in the same situation as before. There's also the issue of gaming history actively getting erased because of remasters and remakes. The $15.99 GBP Yakuza 3 Remastered has been delisted in favour of the $54.99 Yakuza Kiwami 3, a remake that has reviewed poorly, has a fan petition demanding the removal of a voice actor, and which changes key story beats. This means the only version available for purchase is one that's widely considered a downgrade. In some cases, even players who already own the original game can be negatively impacted. Warcraft 3 Reforged irreversibly changed its original game through a forced update. While this is an extreme and uncommon example, it shows that sticking with the version we know and love isn't always an option. At least, not through legal means. The less altruistic and more cynical benefit is profit. According to Ampere Analysis, 2024 and 2025's remakes and remasters reached 72.4 million players and brought in $1.4 billion in revenue. Development costs and timelines are ballooning, with the UK's Competition and Markets Authority citing average development costs of $250 million for AAA titles. So why would a company risk investing that time, effort, and cash into a new IP when you have a built-in nostalgic audience for a project that's already proven to be a success? It seems silly to ignore such a low-risk, high-reward proposal, especially if you have an upcoming sequel or revival to cross-promote. Depending on the effort involved and whether it's a re-release, remaster, or remake, these games can cost anything from $3.99 GBP to a full price $69.99 for us to buy. The higher end of that price point can certainly sting, especially when cheaper alternatives were previously available. Again, the $15.99 Yakuza 3 Remastered was delisted in favour of Kiwami 3, a version that's nearly 3.5 times more expensive. It makes us question why we would revisit an old experience when that same money could buy us a brand new one. Remakes can also serve as proving grounds. Companies give these projects to their new hires or to other developers that they're interested in partnering with, because Learning Science's 70-20-10 model tells us that 10% of what we learn comes from formal training, 20% from peer-to-peer learning and conversations, while the remaining 70% is on-the-job experience. Remakes allow these unproven teams to cut their teeth, get a feel for the franchise, and learn the tools, pipelines, and workflows in a relatively safe environment. It also means that your primary team can continue working on the next mainline entry in the series or even a new IP. This averts fears that resources spent on remasters and remakes are actively reducing the amount of new projects we get, while giving the publisher a fuller release schedule and additional income streams. Of course, it can also go wrong. Resident Evil 3's reimagining was outsourced to MTEL Inc., but the resulting game's critical, commercial, and fan reception are reported to be why Capcom then brought Resident Evil 4 back in-house. One reason is to get new players caught up on a long-running narrative. Trails in the Sky First Chapter is a great example of this. The original game released on the PSP in 2006 in Japan, not reaching the rest of the world until 2011. Despite being part 1 of a trilogy, only the first game got a physical release here in the UK, and even then, at a very low print run. That series, and the overarching story Trails in the Sky started, is still running today, with the most recent game being Trails Beyond the Horizon, which released only a month ago as of writing this script. Although every other Trails game has been made available on PlayStation 4 and 5, this crucial starting point was missing. The best we could do was play the original trilogy via Steam, an entirely different platform. This remake brings that first chapter to PlayStation while replacing the text-heavy, isometric presentation with a voice-acted, fully 3D, cel-shaded alternative. The downside is that it poses a question of what next. We know that second chapter is also getting a remake, due to be released September 2026, but what about third? The next set of games in the franchise, Trails from Zero and Trails to Azure, are already available on PlayStation 4 and 5, but they're presented in their original isometric format. Will these fourth and fifth games feel like a sudden and jarring step down, or will those also be remade? If they are remade, when do the remakes stop? The 4 Cold Steel games might be fully 3D, but their remasters are based on PlayStation Vita games. Again, there would be a stark contrast with the remakes, leading to an inconsistent experience. Thankfully, there is a cutoff point. If there is a time to remake a game, it's now. There have been valid complaints about diminishing returns between console generations. The leap from PlayStation 1 to 2 was transformative, but PlayStation 4 to 5 merely felt iterative. When 1996's Resident Evil 1 got brought to the GameCube just 6 years later in 2002, it was unrecognisable and a substantial upgrade. The benefits were immediately obvious. We can't say the same for The Last of Us. There are differences between each version, but it's much more incremental. We're looking at releases 9 years apart across 3 console generations, and it doesn't have that same mind-blowing wow factor. The changes in the PS5 remake are more subjective, focusing on a change of lighting and the use of different assets, rather than improvements in sheer fidelity. I can see someone preferring the older version's aesthetic. It's much harder to justify remakes from the PS3 and Xbox 360's generation onwards because they still hold up both visually and in terms of gameplay. While the Saturn, PlayStation and Nintendo 64 eras introduced a new frontier of 3D gaming that featured a lot of experimentation, game design patterns were significantly more settled by the time the PS3 rolled around. Game mechanics, controls, and overall design philosophies haven't shifted much in the last 20 years, and I was impressed by what the PS3 could do when I went back to get this footage. It all helps that era of games still feel relevant and current. And if we were to remaster, remake, or reimagine them, what would be the benefit, other than making them available on current hardware? That also means publishers have a shrinking pool of games to remake. After all, not everything was beloved, and not all games are guaranteed to turn a profit if they're made available again. Some titles are trapped in licensing hell and couldn't be redistributed even if a company wanted to. This apparent gold rush of remakes can only run for so long before developers exhaust the veins, and there's simply nothing left that they feel is worth republishing. We're already at a point where Bubsy, of all things, is getting revived. Even if you hate seeing games get constantly reheated, I can reassure you that it can't last forever. Which begs a question. For all I've said, do I hate remakes? And if I do, why do I keep buying them? For me, it's largely the same reasons I buy indie games. I fell in love with gaming during an era where games took a year to make, came from a team of around 20 people who all had significant input, and the rulebooks hadn't been written yet. We got diverse, interesting, and experimental games that all had a message. I feel disillusioned with modern games in part because they take half a decade to make, are made by teams of thousands, and are so heavily focus tested, designed by committee in a risk-averse environment that every game just blurs together. We don't get auteurs, we don't get innovations, nothing stands out or excites me. Remakes promise me the best of both worlds and deliver neither. Old game design practices with modern fidelity. In the best case scenario, I'm reminded of what we lost. My idea that they just don't make them like they used to gets reinforced, and even the message can't land because it's one I've heard before. In the worst case scenario, the people working on the remake don't understand what made the original outing special, and I get something that feels hollow or actively disrespects its source material. Yet I keep buying these comfortable, low-risk options. I remain part of the problem by rewarding companies and encouraging them to keep pumping out remakes. It's not all doom and gloom. I've been having a great time with Trails in the Sky first chapter, and I'm looking forward to second, even if I might miss quality of life features when I move on to the older games that now follow. Yooka-Replaylee was an interesting exercise in giving a poorly received game a second chance, regardless of that remake's relative success. The Croc remaster, especially its revised control scheme, makes it easier to share a beloved game from my childhood with my own children, showing how remakes can serve a purpose under the right circumstances. If I want the industry's habits and behaviours to change, then I first need to look inside and change myself. I need to take more risks on new IPs and lesser known titles, while giving more scrutiny towards remakes, instead of buying them as if it's a natural reflex. I'm not here to tell you to do the same. According to my YouTube analytics, it's statistically probable you're an adult, which is why I'm able to approach this topic with nuance and consideration, instead of having to appeal to a binary extreme. For that, I'm grateful. It feels like we're forming a good community, and I would love for us to have more of these kinds of discussions. To that end, let me know where you stand on remakes. I'm always open to having my perspective challenged, as it would be a boring world if we all agreed on everything all of the time. Now if you'll excuse me, I have to pop to Argos to collect my pre-order of Yakuza Kiwami 3.